Montana Territory, October 1879, the snow started falling just after dusk, thick flakes tumbling through the pines east of Helena, when Xalder Dunn found the wreckage of the wagon. One mule dead, the other limping and tangled in leather. The wooden frame had splintered against a tree, a wheel cracked clean through. He dismounted slow, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground, rifle slung across his back. Then he heard her, a soft groan barely louder than the wind. He stepped around the broken axle and saw the woman slumped against the wagon bed, blood soaking through the side of her dress, one leg bent wrong beneath her. "Miss." His voice was rough from disuse. She blinked up at him, dazed but alive. I cannot move my leg." Xalder dropped to a knee beside her. "You're lucky you're breathing." "What happened?" "Wheel caught a root coming down the ridge. It flipped," she said, her voice tight with pain. "Help me, please. My daughter, where is she?" He looked around fast. No sound but the wind and the groaning mule. "There's no one else here," tears welled in her eyes. "She ran for help. Her name is Nella. She's 10. Xalder's stomach turned. A child alone in these woods with a storm coming. He looked back at the woman. "What's your name?" he asked, already unwinding his bedroll to brace her leg. "Verity Zane." He nodded once. "I'm Xalder Dunn. I'm going to get you out of here." Her eyes fluttered closed, her breathing shallow. He worked fast. The break was bad, maybe worse than he could treat, but she would die out here if he left her. He wrapped her leg and lifted her into his arms. She was light, her body limp with shock. Snow clung to her dark hair, lightning flickered in the distance. He carried her through the rising storm. They made it to a small hunter's cabin he had used before, tucked in a hollow near the river. The door creaked on its hinges as he pushed inside with her still in his arms. He laid her down on the cot, stoked the cold hearth to life, and hung blankets between her and the drafty door. She did not wake for hours. When she finally stirred, her voice was hoarse. "You stayed." "I said I would." She turned her face toward the fire. "I do not know if Nella made it. I do not know where she is." Xalder crouched beside her. "We'll find her. But first, I need you to live through the night." Verity met his eyes. Even in pain, hers held something steady, something unbroken. "Why are you alone out here?" she asked. He hesitated. "Looking for quiet." She gave a tired smile. "Found too much of it, did you?" He did not answer, just checked her bandages. The storm hit hard. Wind screamed through the trees, snow piled against the door. For 2 days they were trapped. Xalder hunted when he could, melted snow for water, kept the fire going. Verity drifted in and out of sleep, fever high but not deadly. He did not talk much. But she did. In pieces, she told him about Kansas, about her husband dying from fever last spring, about taking Nella west to start again, about how everything they owned was in that wagon, about how wrong it had all gone. "She is all I have left," Verity whispered, staring into the fire. "If she is gone." "She is not gone," Xalder said. "You said she ran to find help. That means she made it out. There's a town a day's walk from here. If she kept heading east, she could be there." "You really believe that?" "I do." Something passed between them, then quiet but solid. On the third morning, the storm broke. Xalder stepped outside and looked at the sky, clear, pale blue. The air bit his skin like knives. He went back inside. "I am going to town. I will look for her." Verity's eyes filled. "Please, if you find her, tell her I am here. Tell her I did not leave." He nodded. "You stay alive. That is your job." It took him a day and a half to reach town on foot. He asked around, showed her description to the innkeeper, the blacksmith, the preacher. No one had seen her, but on the third stop at the dry goods store, he got lucky. "She came through 2 days ago," the shopkeeper said. "Said her mother was hurt. We sent a man out, but the storm hit too fast. Thought they maybe holed up somewhere." "Where is she now?" "Staying with the preacher's wife. Real sweet girl." Xalder found her sitting wrapped in a quilt by the stove, small and pale, eyes too old for her face. She stood when she saw him. "Did you find her?" she asked, voice shaking. "She is alive. She is waiting for you." She bolted forward and hugged him tight around the waist. He froze, then gently put a hand on her back. "Can you take me to her?" she asked. "I will carry you there myself." They rode back together on a borrowed wagon. The sun was low by the time they reached the cabin. Verity was sitting up on the cot, pale but awake. Nella ran to her before the wagon fully stopped. "Mama!" Verity's arms opened wide and the girl flew into them. They clung to each other, both crying, both speaking over each other. Xalder stepped back and let them have the moment. Later, after Nella slept curled in blankets by the fire, Verity looked over at him. "You found her. You did not give up," he shrugged. "Felt like the right thing to do. You carried me through a storm," she said. "I remember your arms." "The snow, you did not know me. I know you now." She looked at him for a long time, then she reached out, touched his knuckles where his hands rested on his knees. "I want to know more." His chest tightened. He had not expected this. Not her. Not warmth, not laughter, not a woman who saw past the silence, and he wanted her to stay. The first time Verity stood on her own since the wreck, it was with Xalder's hand braced under her elbow and Nella holding tight to her other side. The splint stayed on, her steps short and cautious, but she made it to the door of the cabin and leaned against the frame, watching the trees shift under a sky pale with late autumn light. "Feels good to breathe different air," she said, her voice low. Xalder gave a quiet nod, eyes scanning the tree line. "You'll be walking without help come spring," he said, "if you rest it right." "I've never been good at resting," she said, but didn't step away from the frame. Nella tugged at her sleeve. "Can we stay here?" Verity's hand settled on her daughter's head, fingers curling in the tangled hair. "We can't live in someone else's cabin forever." "It's not mine," Xalder said, glancing over his shoulder. "Belongs to the land office. No one's claimed it since the man who built it died 5 winters back." "Then what are you doing here?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. "Was working a line camp for a ranch out west of here," he said finally. "Didn't take to the company. Came east, looked for a place where the noise didn't follow." She watched him a long moment. "Have you ever thought of claiming it?" His brow furrowed. "Didn't see the point. Maybe now there is one." He didn't look at her, but the faintest movement crossed his jaw, like a thought starting to stir. That evening, Nella fell asleep with her head on Verity's lap, legs curled close to the fire. Verity sat still, fingers lightly stroking her daughter's back, her gaze on the flames. Xalder sat across from her, sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes. The sound of metal on stone filled the silence. "She was born during a thunderstorm," Verity said softly. "The kind that rattled the windows clear off the hinges. I remember thinking if she could come into this world under that kind of sky, she could survive anything." Xalder didn't look up. "She's stronger than most grown folk I've met. She's had to be," the knife stilled in his hand. He set it down gently on the table beside him. "What about you?" she asked. "Who taught you to survive?" He leaned back in the chair, eyes catching the firelight. "There was a man once. Wrangled cattle, smoked too much, said little, took me in after I lost my folks. Taught me to keep horses calm and people distant." Verity studied him, her voice softer now. "Did it work?" He hesitated. "Mostly." The logs shifted in the hearth, sending up a spray of sparks. "I'm not good at quiet," she said. "I fill it with talk." "Always have." His mouth twitched, but not into a smile. "I don't mind the noise when it's yours." She looked down at Nella, then back at him. "You're not what I expected. When I saw you that night, I thought you were one of those men who pass through, take what they want, and leave the rest to rot. I've done my share of passing through. But you stayed." He met her eyes. "Didn't want to leave." She didn't look away. The next morning, they packed what little they had into saddle bags and canvas bundles. Xalder hitched the borrowed wagon again, but this time, Verity sat up front beside him, Nella between them, leaning against her mother's side. They didn't speak much on the trail, but the silence felt different, less like absence and more like ease. Instead of taking them to the town, Xalder drove north, following a narrow path through the trees. After a while, Verity asked, "Where are we going?" "To the edge of the ridge," he said. "There's a stretch of land up there. Stream runs close, flat enough to build." She looked sideways at him, eyes narrowing. "You planning to claim it?" He kept his eyes forward. "Only if there's a reason to." Verity turned to watch the trees slip past. "Well," she said. "You've got two." He glanced at her. And this time he didn't look away. By early November, the snow had stopped clinging to the trees and began melting into the soil, turning the path to the ridge into a narrow ribbon of dark earth. Xalder walked beside the wagon, reins in hand, while Verity sat above with Nella nestled close against her coat. They reached the clearing at mid-morning, where the land opened wide beneath a sky washed clean by wind. Verity studied the place in silence. Thick stands of spruce to the north, a gentle slope falling toward a bend in the creek, the sound of water soft and constant. "This is good land," she said. Xalder glanced toward the stream. "Soil's deep near the southern edge. Could plant come spring." "I can read land, Xalder," she said, eyes still on the curve of the slope. "I grew up watching my father coax corn from limestone and clay." He nodded once. "Cabin go best near the ridge line, catch the morning light." She looked at him then, her mouth soft. "You already pictured it." He shifted his weight slightly but didn't turn away. "Been picturing a lot of things lately." Nella climbed down from the wagon and ran toward the creek, her laughter rising bright through the trees. Verity watched her go with a look that held something deeper than relief. "She's been sleeping through the night again," Verity said quietly. "First time since her pa died." Xalder's gaze followed the child. "She's safe now." Verity stepped down carefully, her legs still stiff but stronger. She kept hold of the wagon rail a moment longer than she needed. Then she turned toward him, voice low. "What made you stay out here all this time, really?" He didn't answer at once. A hawk circled high above the trees, casting a slivered shadow that passed over the clearing like a breath. "There were people I couldn't be near anymore," he said at last. "I got good at making myself absent. You're not absent now." "No." Verity stepped closer. "I don't want to start something just because we're the only two grown souls for miles. I've lived enough to know the difference between need and want. So have I." They stood quiet a beat. The wind moved through the grass, and Nella's footsteps splashed along the creek's edge. Verity reached for a strand of hair the wind had pulled loose and tucked it behind her ear. "I won't raise her in a place where everything's borrowed, not again." "You don't have to," she looked at him. "You sure about that?" Xalder met her gaze without wavering. "I've got a claim form in my saddlebag, brought it from town." Her breath caught just slightly. "You haven't filed it yet," she said. "I was waiting to see if it'd be filed under one name or three." She didn't speak right away. Then a slow, steady smile grew on her lips, one that reached her eyes. "Well," she said, brushing her hand across her skirt, "you'll need someone to help mark the foundation lines." Xalder tilted his head slightly. "You offering?" "I always was." That night they built a fire beneath the open sky. The cabin would come later, but for now there was warmth, and bread baked in a cast iron pan, and the sound of Nella snoring softly under a wool blanket nearby. Verity sat beside Xalder, her shoulder just brushing his. She watched the stars, her voice quiet and even. "I used to think all love ever did was take. My first husband, he was kind but tired. Every day wore him thinner, and by the end there was nothing left to give." Xalder didn't interrupt, didn't move. "But this," she said, turning to him, "feels like something that gives back." He looked at her then, and something in him broke open, not loud or fast, but like thawed ground letting go of ice. "I didn't expect any of this," he said. "No," Verity whispered. "But you carried me anyway." Xalder's hand found hers, rough palm closing around her fingers with care that didn't need explaining. The wind rose again, but this time it carried only the scent of pine smoke, and something new taking root. By late November, the ridge had begun to harden beneath the heel again, the earth no longer softened by meltwater. Xalder set the first corner post of the new cabin with Verity watching from a split log bench, a ledger balanced on her knees. Nella was down by the creek gathering smooth stones, her canvas pouch slapping against her hip each time she stooped. "You've got the east wall too close to the edge," Verity said, tapping something with the end of her pencil. If we want a back porch come summer, it'll need 5 more feet. Xalder glanced over his shoulder. You planning to sit out there and boss me from a rocker? I was planning to have my coffee there before you're even up. You really think I sleep in? No, she said, looking back at the page. But I think you'll pretend to, just to let me have the morning quiet. He set the mallet aside and came to stand near her. You think a lot about how things'll be. I have to, she said, her tone even. I've lived too long with things falling apart not to picture how they'll hold. Xalder sat beside her without asking. So what do you picture? She didn't answer right away, the pencil stilled in her fingers. A table with 4 chairs, not 3. A clothesline that runs from the back post to that spruce tree. A woman who doesn't flinch when the wind picks up. Xalder looked out toward the horizon, where the light broke clean across the foothills. I never pictured much beyond the day I was in. Didn't see the shape of things ahead. You didn't have to, Verity said. You kept walking forward anyway. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Might be I want to see it now, the shape of it. Verity set the ledger down beside her. Then let's build it right. That night, Nella fell asleep wrapped in a quilt stitched with faded yellow thread. Xalder had brought in a brace of rabbits earlier, and Verity had cooked them with dried sage and a tin of wild onions. The scent still hung in the corners of the cabin frame, which now had 3 walls and a roofline roughed in. You ever think about going back? Verity asked, arms folded across her lap as she sat on the cot's edge. To wherever you came from before Montana. Nothing there worth walking toward, he said. No people, maybe 1 or 2, but they've got their own land now, their own quiet. She studied his face. You don't miss them? I miss how I was with them, he said. But that man's gone. The one who didn't know how to stay. I buried him out west of the divide. Verity reached for a tin cup, sipping what was left of the boiled chicory. Seems to me you're building something now he never could have. He watched her fingers around the cup, the steadiness in them. You ever think about Kansas? I think about the parts that were good, but I don't ache for it. What do you ache for then? She looked toward the sleeping form of her daughter, a place where she can grow older without fear. You think this is that place? I think it could be, she said. If the man who lives here is willing to hold steady when things turn hard. I've held through worse than hard, he said. But I never had anyone waiting under the same roof at the end of it. You do now. He didn't move, just let the words settle. Then he reached for the fire iron and adjusted the coals. The orange light flickered low across the walls, catching the fresh cut lumber and the shadow of her face. You're not what I expected either, he said. You wanted someone quieter? I didn't want anyone, he said, until you. Outside, the wind moved through the pine without urgency. Inside, she stood and crossed the floor to where he sat near the hearth. She didn't speak, only rested her hand on his shoulder. He covered it with his own. Neither of them had to say they'd stay. It had already become true. The first frost held through December, and by mid-month the cabin stood with a full roof and smoke rising steady from its chimney. Xalder had set the last cedar shingle the morning before, while Verity stayed inside sewing curtains from a bolt of muslin traded for eggs and salt. Nella swept sawdust from the entry with a switch broom and hummed tunelessly, her cheeks flushed from the cold. The table came next, built by Xalder's hands from 2 wide planks he'd planed smooth. He stained it with pine tar and boiled linseed, and when Verity ran her fingers across the grain, she said, "This'll hold more than meals. This'll hold years." That night, she lit a stub of tallow candle and sat beside him on the hearth bench while Nella dozed on a braided rug near the fire. Snow ticked softly at the window glass. You ever think about marrying again? She asked, not looking at him. He shifted, not startled, just slow in his reply. I never thought I'd build a home again, let alone with someone who knew how to fill it. I didn't say I would, she said, glancing at him now. I asked if you thought about it. I thought about it the first time I saw you stir awake in that cot, he said. Didn't have a name for it, but I knew it was something I'd never carried before. She reached for his hand, not tentative but sure. I've been someone's wife. I've been someone's widow. Both made me smaller than I am. I won't go back to that. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. Not ever. She leaned her head to his shoulder, her voice low. Then ask me something else. Xalder turned toward her, his face lit gold by the fire. Stay. Build this life with me. Be mine and let me be yours. Verity's hand tightened around his. I already am. They were married 2 weeks later, just after the new year, in a quiet gathering inside the cabin. The preacher rode up from town, his horse steaming in the cold. Nella stood beside her mother in a dress stitched from blue calico, her hands folded proper, her smile too wide to contain. Verity wore her hair in one long braid down her back, fastened with a strip of ribbon Xalder had kept folded inside his coat pocket since the day he found it in the wrecked wagon. After the vows were spoken, and the preacher gone, Xalder led Verity outside and pointed to the hill behind the cabin. I cleared a path for spring planting, he said, but there's space enough for something else if you want it. She followed his gaze. What space? For whatever you need to remember the life before this one, he said. A place to set stones or say names. She blinked slow, then nodded. There's 2 names I'd like to mark, one for the man who gave Nella her eyes, and one for the girl I used to be. Xalder took her hand. Show me where. That spring they planted beans and potatoes along the slope. Nella helped dig rows, her hands stained with soil and her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Verity taught her how to test the earth's warmth by kneeling and pressing her wrist to the ground. Xalder built a fence from split rails and drove each post deep with a maul. Verity hung the wash on the line behind the house, her hair streaked with sunlight and her feet bare in the grass. She sang sometimes, not loud, but just enough to carry through the open window where Xalder sat carving a set of wooden spoons for the kitchen drawer. They never spoke of the storm again, not because it was forgotten but because it had passed and they had lived through it. One evening, Verity stood in the doorway, watching dusk settle over the pines. Xalder came to stand behind her, his hand resting at her waist. I used to think peace was something you bought in pieces, she said. A quiet night here, a calm moment there, but this, she turned to look up at him, this is whole. He didn't answer at once, just watched her face the way the fading light caught in her eyes. I don't have words for what this is, he said, but I know I'd give my life to keep it. She leaned into him. You already did, and so did I. That night they lay in the bed they'd built together, the window cracked to let in the scent of pine. Nella slept in the next room, her breathing even. The cabin creaked gently as the wind shifted. Verity traced the line of Xalder's collarbone with her fingertip. Do you think we'll grow old here? I hope so, he said. I want to see your hair turn silver. I want to hear Nella laugh with children of her own. Verity smiled, her voice a whisper. Then we'll stay. And they did. They stayed through the turning years, through hard winters and green springs, through drought and bloom, through the ache of growing older and the ease of having someone to lean on. The table held its years, and the porch was built just wide enough for 2 chairs. Nella grew tall and quick-witted, her hands skilled with needle and spade. She married a quiet boy from the valley and built her home not far from the ridge. On warm afternoons, she brought her children to visit, and Verity poured milk into tin cups while Xalder showed them how to track deer prints in the dust. The stones up on the hill weathered soft but stood firm. And every fall, Verity placed wildflowers beside them, reminders not of what had been lost, but of what had been carried forward. They never left the land they claimed. They never stopped choosing each other. And they never needed more than what they'd built hand in hand, heart in heart, under the wide Montana sky.